Okay, great. So thank you all for being here. Welcome to State of the Arts, a Vision and Landscape. My name is Warren Reese. Pronouns are he, him, and his. I work on the local government affairs team at SDG&E, and I'm so pleased to welcome you here as board chair of Catalyst of San Diego and Imperial counties. For those of you who don't know, many of you probably know because you're probably members, but we're a network of 150 funders and impact investors that connect and activate funders to learn, lead, and invest in our communities. The way I like to think about it is to give more and to give better, right? And give with an equity lens for all of the things that our communities need. So that's what we work on. That's who Catalyst is. Thank you for being part of our family today. Today you'll hear about how investing in arts and culture strengthens the social and economic fabric of our communities. When you think about education, health, economic development, and their ties to equity and justice, every aspect of our lives intersects with arts and culture, both as a workforce and as a cultural meaning maker. At Catalyst, we really do see the intersectional approach to those things to be collaborative and impactful. We try to develop programming such as this to help you all give better when it comes to this sector. When it comes to long-term change, partnership and with committed and visionary, talented elected leaders is key to advancing the policies that I just spoke about. And to lay a groundwork for a different future. And to that end, we're grateful to have a partnership with the City of San Diego and its leader, Mayor Todd Gloria, who joins us today, who's always been, and especially in his current role, a dedicated advocate for the arts, culture and heritage programming. His Back to Work San Diego budget is committed to advancing an equitable and inclusive creative economy and cultural ecosystem. And to that end, we thank him for his leadership. He's joined by two Catalyst members who we adore and appreciate their time and talents. The City of San Diego's Commission for Arts and Culture, which, as many of you know, tirelessly promotes and supports the region's artistic and cultural assets, and also the Clare Rose Foundation, which has brought leadership to creative youth development that is benefiting our region and has been recognized on a national stage. So thanks to everybody for being here. With that, I'll introduce Matt Arrigo, Director of Creative Youth Development at Clare Rose, to start us off today.
Thank you, Warren, for that kind introduction, and for Catalyst for being a partner and hosting this 6-part learning series. Today we'll launch it with, as you said, myself and Mayor Todd Gloria and Jonathon Glus to give an overall vision and landscape of arts and culture in San Diego. And we'll follow this by monthly meetings over the next 6 months. They'll dive into particular cross-sector intersection points with health, wellness, justice, education, community development, and workforce development. Before we start, just a couple of quick housekeeping items to go over. A reminder that the session will be recorded and you'll receive a link of it afterwards via email from Catalyst. Please introduce yourself in the chat so we get to know who's in the room, just your name, pronouns if you wish, and organization you're representing. Please put any questions in the chat that arise as discussion as the presentations are going. And we'll pause after each speaker to engage in some dialogue and questions. So please put those questions in the chat. And at the end, Catalyst is asking us to fill out a brief survey. So we appreciate your participation in that. It just takes a minute or two. All right, so the inspiration for this series was born from a number of conversations before the pandemic, and then they really ramped up during the pandemic among some funders here in San Diego who were concerned that the arts were primarily being viewed and funded through the lens of tourism and entertainment. And we were missing some of the most dynamic and transformational work happening in communities, at the border, and in non-traditional settings such as prisons and juvenile detention centers. So Jonathon and I began to kind of plot and plan a series, a learning series to lift this work up and to educate and engage the broader philanthropic community in what's happening locally at the intersection of arts and culture with health, justice, education, community development, and workforce development. We wanted to bring together local partners and practitioners working in these spaces, as well as bring in some of our national peers and colleagues to share successful models and practices happening around the country. But today, we want to focus on what's happening locally, and we're so fortunate to have both Jonathon and Mayor Gloria with us. So I'd like to hand it over to Jonathon to take it from here.
Thanks, Matt. Welcome, everyone. Great to see you. So many friends on the call today. It's wonderful to be with you. As Matt mentioned, the pandemic created a sense of urgency around this series as we all experience not just COVID-19, but the social justice reckoning across the country and here at home. We saw tremendous personal and foundation generosity in response to the greatest needs since the Great Depression. Here in San Diego, we can all be proud to say that the collective impact was fast and really profound. It was really tremendous. We also witnessed areas of our creative ecosystem and our cultural workforce overlooked in relief efforts. So we tailored this learning series to explore how we can center arts and culture in our recovery by sharing best practices and new models here at home and from colleagues across the country. But today we have the great good fortune of kicking off this series with our Mayor Todd Gloria. I don't need to introduce Mayor Gloria. Everyone knows him on this call and has known of he and his work for a long time. But I would like to say that in just a few short months in office, Mayor Gloria has set an extraordinarily high bar for the city in regards to building a great city. And while doing so, he is ensuring that every San Diegan has a seat at the table. I personally have the good fortune of working for Mayor Gloria every day and helping him implement his vision. For that, I'm honored to introduce Mayor Gloria to share some of his vision for our region and the arts. Mayor Gloria, thank you for taking some time from your schedule, and I'll turn it to you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Good afternoon, everybody. I have to admit, I logged on here and I just feel like I'm hanging out with friends this afternoon. I see so many people that are true friends or just folks I admire greatly. So this is a much more of a comfortable conversation. Forgive me if I become too chatty. It's just good to see you all. I would prefer to do this in person, but I'm grateful that we at least have this technology to bring us all together. And I hope that you'll agree with me that Jonathan's doing a fantastic job helping to lead our Arts and Culture Commission. Soon after I was sworn in, we had an opportunity to kind of get a level set for his department, and what he's been able to do in the time that I was away at the state level is really remarkable. And that is underwhelming in terms of his description, because I will tell you that what he described, I don't even think was a germ of an idea when I was on the city council. And yet here we are actually executing on some of these ideas of really taking what this conversation is about, really expanding this beyond what sometimes people think of as an elective to our city's syllabus of required actions, or maybe the cherry on top after everything else has been set in place, but really putting arts more at the center of our conversation, and importantly, seeking it to drive more than just involving beauty into our lives, or something that is something we do in our spare time, but really finding ways to make sure this penetrates all the areas that are crying out for action right now, right? And I think that Jonathan and I, and all of you are in public service, but all of us are in this game together. We're all residents of the city. There's so much need in our community, and there's so much action that has to be taken. And I think it was DeLugue that was maybe first, not so long ago, suggested to me that in the process of responding to those concerns, that we don't have to have just an economic development response. That economic development response can be inclusive of arts and culture, that we can have a crime prevention response that is inclusive of arts and culture. There's a number of ways that we can thread these together, and interestingly, have a deeper impact, have a more profound impact, have one that drives greater change. I think that's why we're all here. In addition to seeing a lot of friends on the screen, I see a lot of change makers here. And I think that that's what we should do. Jonathan got to, and some of you heard me talk ad nauseum about what the heck I wanted this job for. And 228 days in, I do ask myself that every now and again. But it's times like these that we all have to stand up. And I can do this work because I know so many of you are standing with me, either standing behind me to support me, or knowing that I'm right behind you, pushing right alongside you. We have important work that we have to do. And my general observation for our city is that we're the 8th largest city in the country, but we don't act like it. And when we don't act like our size and diversity and strength of a city that we are, we miss key opportunities to do that twofer that DeLugue talked to me about not long ago, that Matt often reminds me of, and that Jonathan's working on every day. And I hope that my value add is as Jonathon and his team are executing on their brilliant vision for how we can make arts and culture work better, at least as a municipal entity, that they have a leader that stands with them and says, yes, more of that, please. And I know Jonathon's working really hard, but I'm a bit relentless, a bit of a perfectionist, and want to just push harder and harder because we know the needs are out there, right? We know there's so many needs that are out there, and our ability to deliver are pretty important. Beyond sort of dreaming big dreams for our big city, it's important to me as the first person of color and the first LGBTQ person in this office to make sure that what we're doing is really enlarging the conversation, that we're throwing the doors open of opportunity a bit bigger, a bit wider for more people. And so it's about creating a city that works really for all of us. And I think that frame is helpful for the arts and culture community, because when you think of arts solely from a tourism standpoint, and my friend Robert Gleason has no problem with that whatsoever, but even Robert, as a great tourism leader in this community, is also a magnificent arts and culture leader because they're not binary choices. It's not zero sum, right? So a city that works for all of us is recognizing that if we throw the door open wider, if we bring artists to the table, if we do this work collectively, we will do better. I will say that our first city budget, which could have been a mess, thank you, Joe Biden, the U.S. Senate, Stacey Abrams, everyone who was able to pass a relief plan that brought us some additional cash. We were able to run it through this filter, the work that Jonathon's doing, that Matt and DeLuge and this Catalyst and everyone's really asking for, and making sure that as we do, say, summer youth employment, that we're doing it with an opportunity for establishing career pathways to the arts for some of these young folks, right? That as we do more recreational programming, that we're partnering with local nonprofit arts organizations to say this isn't just about keeping the rec centers open longer, but it's about providing a little bit of key funding so that arts groups like, say, the Fern Street Circus can be a part of that particular effort. Again, it's not stovepiping, it's not binary, it's not just saying, hey, the Fern Street folks work over there. We're inviting them into communities and exposing young people and families who would otherwise not have ever seen this. We need to do this more often. Right now, this is groundbreaking for us a bit. With Jonathon's leadership, the leadership of that Park and Rec department, I think we can do more of that, but it's really you all that are going to hold us accountable. They're going to point out more opportunities where that kind of cross-pollination can happen. And I really hope that you will not be shy in doing so. I'm pretty sure you wouldn't be, but this is your open invitation to saying no apologies necessary. Please step forward and make these recommendations. And then I would point out that this is really important within the context of our recovery. I'm mindful of the fact that while all of us have been impacted by the resulting financial crisis coming from the pandemic, our arts and culture organizations have been particularly hurt, right? If you are incumbent upon bringing people together to experience art and you can't come together to do that, you're tremendously impacted. We've used $10 million with $2 million from the San Diego Foundation to create a $12 million relief fund with an emphasis or an encouragement for arts and culture organizations, nonprofits to petition for those dollars. So again, really putting arts and culture at the front of this stuff so that as we recover and we reopen, that we have more arts organizations that survive this terrible time than otherwise, right? My fear is that we reopen, but there's nothing to see. What's to see are empty spaces, vacant walls, no performances, and empty venues. That would be terrible. I want to conclude because, as Matt mentioned, there's an opportunity for dialogue, and that's where these things are usually far more impactful, far more useful, hopefully for you, but definitely for me. I love hearing your questions, your observations, your comments. But I hope what you take away is that I have a big agenda. We have a lot going on. And when you see me talking about housing or homelessness or transportation infrastructure, I hope that you'll know that implicit in that, and Jonathon's going to be our initiative voter for helping us do this, that we are anticipating and making sure that as we talk about homeless services, that there can be an arts component of it. We understand that that's possible and that would be preferred. That as we build new housing, that it needs to have design aspects that can make us proud, that can create a community network that is something that people can be proud of, that we continue to be a beautiful city. And that as we do infrastructure, recognizing that arts is integral. We've had this whole fight in the nation currently about what is infrastructure. Well, I would argue very strongly that arts are part of critical infrastructure. And as we do this work of rebuilding our neighborhoods, particularly underserved neighborhoods, that arts are a part of that. So this big vision is big. It's only possible if there's a lot of people there to carry it with me. Hope all of you will be there to carry the load. And that if we can do it together, I'm confident that we can move things forward and that we can throw off this yoke of a small town, embrace our size, and really start punching above our weight when it comes to what's going on here. I know a lot of these individual organizations that are on the screen have been doing that for a long time. We have incredible arts organizations that do our community proud. What I want you to have is a full partner at the city that sees you, recognizes, invests, and aligns our initiatives with your initiatives so that we match that big city that I believe we are more than capable of being. So Jonathon, Matt, thank you for letting me provide those introductory comments. And again, I'm happy to have a dialogue with a very smart crowd that is here for the time that we have remaining.
Thank you, Mayor. Appreciate your vision, insights, and commitment to the arts. And as you said, I think many of us feel like it's time for San Diego to, as you said, punch beyond its weight, right? We're a small city, but we're really a big city, 8th largest city in the country. We've got a tremendous amount of wealth in the city. But what do you feel like, what do you think has been pivoted, and what do we need to pivot to really kind of come together? I know, especially in the recovery, other cities such as LA and San Francisco and Chicago and Boston and New York really kind of came together, the cities and philanthropy, in a huge response. Now, the reality is we don't have the same size arts and culture foundations in San Diego as some of these other cities, but it doesn't mean we can't have a huge impact. We can use the resources we have. So what do you think we need to do as a community, as a city and philanthropic community, to come together in more of a collective action approach?
Well, it starts a little bit with this, right? I mean, having Catalyst and Warren, good to see you, my friend. Having this forum as a start to that. But Matt, I think a part of what you said is actually reinforcing the frame that I'm concerned about. Yes, we don't have as many Fortune 500 companies here. I totally get that. But there is plenty of wealth here. I was at an event recently. Yeah. It's unnecessary to identify who it is. I don't want to suggest that they are not doing their part for the community. They are. But let me tell you, the number of Bentleys and Rolls and Ferraris and whatnot that are coming out of that parking lot, and these folks are local, right? These were not out-of-state plates on these cars. My point is, there are plenty of folks who are here in this community. I think what I'm responsible for, I think what we are responsible for, is creating a vision that they want to be a part of. It seems like everyone wants to invest in stadiums and, big ego pieces and whatever. What we have to do is really encourage people to think about, how does this translate on the neighborhood level? How can we make this sustainable over the long term? It's nice to make an anchor gift, but what can you do to make sure this is here over time? This is where I think Catalyst is helpful in terms of being an anchor organization in town that's, helping to make philanthropy a bit more strategic. But a lot of it comes to, what are we selling? What are we telling to investors, if you will, that they want to invest in? Dollars Donuts, a lot of those folks I saw pulling out of that parking lot are probably spending their money elsewhere because their visions are bigger and it's therefore more interesting to people. I think it's incumbent upon us to say, I watched a piece just yesterday about the new floating island at Hudson Yards in New York City that was philanthropically based. That idea wouldn't even make it out of its first committee in this city because it would be seen as being too complicated. What are these people paying for this for? Why is it privately funded? Let's dispense with those usual complaints and let's adopt a culture of yes that says, actually that would be really interesting. And how can we do that and say, how can we recruit Vicky Estrada to design it so that it's fabulous and that everyone loves it and it'll endure for all time? I think that what I can bring is, again, elevating the conversation to say, as I did at a thing recently, the shell that the symphonies put out there is magnificent. It's amazing. And I was taking a tour with some folks and they were suggesting modifications to this beautiful design that's going to be a home for arts and culture. And I just thought that is so San Diego, right? When we get something done right, that people will throw stones at it even before it's open. And so in sharing later, like, you don't need to do that. The mayor's going to give a big thumbs down on modifying this because this is brilliant as it is right now. Let's see how it goes. I think that we have to find more positive things and give people the opportunity to invest. There are dollars in this town. I just think that if your ideas are bunny ears on the waterfront or something like that, that's just not gonna invite the kind of participation that we need in order to do things at the big city level that I think we need to do things.
As a reminder, anybody that has any questions or feedback for the mayor, please put it in the chat. I'll push on myself with some. Yeah. That's a great example of the new symphony, the shell, right, which is iconic and beautiful, and $130 million. I think worth every penny. It's going to really a great investment. I think so many people see things as a either or, not a yes and. Like there's enough wealth to do that and to invest in the small community-based organizations doing work in neighborhoods. But it seems that the larger investments have been hard to come by. And I don't know, like I guess maybe it's a narrative change or a change of culture if it's possible, but that's kind of, I think, the direction that I think philanthropy can step in, is being more intentional, looking at the ecosystem holistically, the institutions and the small organizations in Barrio Logan and Southeast, and seeing them as just as important as each other, right?
Yeah. Well, so maybe two quick thoughts about that, Matt, is maybe in reverse order, the underserved community piece, this equity lens, which, is said so often now that we all know what that means, and it almost feels trite, but it is important, right? Just because we all know what it means and doesn't mean it's not important. It is important. Our new chief equity officer will be starting here at the city in just a couple of days, and she will be our initiative owner. I hope all of you will meet her, Kim Desmond. She's coming from Denver. Very proud of her. I think it speaks very highly of our city that we can recruit talent like that to San Diego to help us do this work. But to your point about how we can drive investment, often the city's the first investor, right? And to the extent that we often have not made decisions and funding in a equitable sense, then we're not driving those dollars into those communities where we can be the first one in and hopefully attract other folks. And so I want you all to see this as the opportunity that I believe it to be. If you're running infrastructure investment through an equity lens, which we will be doing, or we are, and we will be doing more of, arts and culture funding, other kinds of funding, see where our dollars are flowing and maybe help us point in the right direction. I think one of the challenges of equity is often the people doing the best work are unknown to folks on the 11th floor and City Hall. We got to change that. We're going to be doing that work, and my hope is that as early investors, private philanthropy will come behind us. The second thing I'll mention is that I recognize often the city is the impediment to this work. And what I mean by that is that, they were very nice on the tour, but the people at the Shell or the Symphony didn't say anything bad about the city's permitting process. But I imagine we could have been a better partner in that process. My guess, I don't know. We could advocate on their behalf at the state level because it's coastal zone, and that's often a thing. I'll point out in Balboa Park, there's going to be a proof point for whether or not we're changing the culture around here. I've asked staff, follow the law, use common sense, but rather than say no, if you haven't seen this before, say, tell me more, right? I'd like to know more. Don't say no just because it's new and it's different. That's going to kill creativity. That will make our city look like every other city on the globe, and I don't want us to look like that. With the merger of the Friends of Balboa Park and the Balboa Park Conservancy, we now have an opportunity as a city to extend an official connection to that organization, to drive philanthropy into the park, to do more brick and mortar improvements as well as programming improvements. That kind of, if we can use our participation in that deal to drive more investment, then we will have done our job correctly. And Steve Hill from my team, who you all know and love better than me, and because you got good taste, Steve Hill is working with the city attorney's office now to drive that agreement, so that these two organizations, which I think probably a lot of you didn't think they'd ever be able to come to an agreement to merge, well, they did. And now it's the next question of, is it impossible? Can the city see through to creating the kind of relationship that would leverage private sector resources to actually make the park even better and more brilliant than it already is? I believe we can. My hope is that we'll execute that agreement. And then again, it's incumbent upon the philanthropic world to follow behind us and say, we're going to reward that with the botanical building improvements, or with facade improvements, with more funding for operations and maintenance, for new initiatives to bring more people to the park. So stay tuned on that front.
Great, thank you. I know there's like Dahan, I just want to reflect back what you put in the chat, that San Diego's celebration of art and culture and history, the identity of its African American, can help promote health, employment, career development, middle class, we just moved on, career development, middle class family development. We want the San Diego Black Arts Culture Business District in Canto as represented as the foundation, but we need partnership to create a positive area that builds our positive growth and self-actualization. It's a great example, right, of how does government, private philanthropy, the business community come together to put, I think on the national, talking with some national peers, there's a lot of arts and culture focus has been shifted through a social justice lens and investments and partnering with cities and businesses. how can we do that more thoughtfully here in San Diego to address what DeHaan's talking about, right?
Yeah, I love that comment, DeHaan. Thank you for putting that on there. And the fact is, we're going to be investing a lot in Southeast and in Canto. And the question becomes, are we doing it in a way that's a sort of force multiplier, right? We can build a building, but is it going to be something that is beautiful? Are we going to do it in conjunction with community groups to help them advance their mission? Is it done in a way that it's just additive, right? We had this whole fight at Sandag on Friday. We're going to spend over $100 billion to build a transportation network. Are we going to do it in a way that actually builds careers and helps middle-class families live in San Diego? Or are we just going to just spend that money and hope for the best? We're choosing now to be intentional and looking for those accessory benefits. And I would argue that's true for District 4 as well. I'd throw 8, 9, and parts of 7 and others in there as well. Point is, we'll be building fire stations. We will be building the office center on Imperial, so on and so forth. My hope is that we can identify community partners in that so that it's not just a one-off for the city, but that it has expanded impact beyond that. And that requires the city to operate a bit differently. So that's going back to the culture of yes comment that I had before, and just inviting staff to really consider before saying no, because we've never done it before, to try and find another way to say yes to it.
That's great. I know we've only got you for a few more minutes because I know you're a busy man. But so Vicky Estrada said, I'm convinced that we can combine the arts and climate change in unique ways, but the CAP doesn't address that much. Can we add to the CAP?
Well, we are. And Vicky, you need another committee in your life like you need a hole in the head. However, the Climate Action Plan, when I wrote it back when I was on the city council, mandates that every 5 years that we update it. And so the first 5 years has passed. We are updating it now. We're calling it Climate Plan 2.0. And so that work is now. And I hope that you would be a part of that. We're trying to reorganize the city's bureaucracy for a sustainability department, which currently exists, but to try and make sure that these, again, additive pieces of it, right? We're acting for climate because that's important. But while doing that work, can we find workforce development opportunities? Can we green the fleet of the city, so on and so forth? So I think that's great. Maybe Steve, if you want to just drop a line to our team about that component of it, because I think that would be important. Again, this is work that we're going to be doing. The question is, can you take the extra couple of minutes, probably not even extra a whole lot of money, and add an art component to it or make it more beneficial? I would say yes to that, but it has to be in the plan. So let's get folks in this community involved in the arts, in Climate Plan 2.0.
Yeah, that kind of leads into one last question with Denise Montgomery. Hold on, it just shifted. But yeah, are there particular boards or commissions at the local or state level, especially with your experience at the state level, Todd, that where arts and culture leaders can have a seat at the table? Because I do think it's embedding arts leaders, both on the nonprofit side and the philanthropic side, in these conversations to have a seat at the table.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it just gets reactive. So are there particular areas that you see within the city, but also state, where we can have some leadership at the table in these conversations, driving some of those conversations?
Yeah, the premise is spot on, right? Like, you got to be at the table, and particularly tables that may not seem like arts tables, right? Because working out this premise that everything is connected back to arts and culture, and some things have historically been inclusive of that. I'm thinking of like the Historic Resources Board. It's kind of obvious it's there, but what about the Planning Commission, right? Who's the one that's going to ask every project that comes before? What's that component? I would say our Gang Prevention Commission. There are plenty of places and endpoints for that. Where that would be appropriate. What I will tell you is my commitment, I think for a lot of folks, and many of you have been on this, it's often about who you know, right? And you're often getting tapped on the shoulder to serve on these things. And what we've chosen to do is invert that. Last week, we've started a new website, onboard.sandiego.gov. And the idea is that it puts out everything that's out there in terms of current vacancies. It shows you a forward look for what vacancies are coming, and then allows you to apply right on the website. And so it's basically taking the guesswork out of it. You don't need to know some mayoral staffer who's going to return your phone call and tell you about an appointment that's coming up 5 months from now that you can plan ahead and be the only applicant for. We're really throwing the door open wider. I think as a result, we're going to get a lot more people applying, which is great. But the question becomes, Matt, I think you said it was Denise's question, about who's applying. And so while you're sitting on here and listening to myself or others talk, open another window, go to onboard.sandiego.gov, look at some of those upcoming things and apply. And drop Steve Hill a line when you do, so that we know, hey, there's an arts person in the queue for that. But I mean, the answer really is all of them. I think about the Port Commission, right? They have a ton of art stuff going on there, right? And again, is that a question that is asked before we appoint somebody? The Airport Authority. I mean, the place is gorgeous. Thank you, Robert Gleason. It is far better than an airport ought to be, but that's because you had an arts advocate that's there. What happens when you have someone on every board or commission like that? But it starts with actually making it clear what's available. It is infinitely clearer now. It's no more sort of guesswork on what's happening there. It's very apparent to the public. So there's no more excuses about, I didn't know about that. It's right there. It's very clear. And we made it super easy for everybody.
That's great. And what was that website again? Just so we have it.
Onboard.sandiego.gov.
That's great, because half the time people just don't know where to find stuff, what's available. So that's going to be huge for accessibility.
Yeah. And I'm sorry to interrupt everybody, but Mayor's got to go on to his next event.
He gave us an extra 3 minutes. I appreciate it, Mayor. And thank you for your time and your vision and your commitment to the arts. We look forward to partnering with you and the rest of the city staff. And Steve will be hearing from us a lot. So thank you for taking the time.
My pleasure, you guys. Wonderful to see everybody. Be well and stay safe, okay?
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
All right. So with that, I know we're at 2:03. We want to keep this moving along. We're going to hand it over to Jonathon Glus so we can hear from the Commission for Arts and Culture perspective on some of the things that Mayor Gloria talked about, but also looking at what the reality is, what the landscape is of arts and culture in San Diego today, especially coming out of COVID-19. And so Jonathon, why don't you let us know your point of view, your insights and your data. I'll hand it over.
Great, thanks. That's great. Thank you, Matt. So just like to position this, that firstly, it's so great to see so many friends and colleagues. But for the purposes of the fact that this is one of 6 sessions, and this will be posted, so we plan on a lot more individuals, colleagues, both in philanthropy and public policy, being able to look at this conversation. So I do want to frame up the position of the city a bit in the larger context of the county, and in particular arts funding, public arts funding. I think everybody on this call knows that the city, through the Commission for Arts and Culture, is the largest single annual funder of nonprofit arts and culture in the city and in the region. The role in itself is somewhat unusual for large US cities, where philanthropy more often plays the larger role. So we take the obligation seriously, and I'm acknowledging a handful of commissioners on the call today who are really steadfast in acknowledging the importance of the annual funding through the Arts Commission. We peaked in funding pre-pandemic at about $13 million, distributed to about 170 organizations of all sizes, with grants nearing 500,000 and down to 5,000. San Diego County provides funding, but not through an organized process. It focuses on baseline general operating needs. And a number of other municipalities throughout the county have offices of arts and culture, but direct funding is limited. The result across the county is a bit of a piecemeal public funding approach. And in the absence of a county art agency, we don't have that overlay that infills around the municipal agencies. So there's tremendous pressure on the city resources for baseline sustainability of the field. And as we learned through these last 18 months, we rely on TOT taxes, or transit occupancy taxes, to fuel the funding program, which can occasionally fluctuate dramatically, as it did during the Great Recession, and now during the time of COVID-19. Unfortunately, we suffered a 48% cut in the annual funding program last year, simply due to the cataclysmic drop in TOT revenues in 2020. Fortunately, we're building back now, and with the leadership of Mayor Gloria and his enthusiasm, we'll be able to build back to pre-pandemic levels. but doing so with some lessons learned. And I want to share just a few. In the fall of 2020, we commissioned the USD Center for Nonprofit Management to conduct a confidential survey of all of our grantees. Although the data is more than 9 months old, at this point, the findings are still instructive. More than 40% of the nonprofit arts and culture workforce was furloughed or laid off. And the percentage of contract workers whose contracts were canceled or not realized was even higher. So at minimum, 4 in 10 regularly employed cultural workers were unemployed, and more for the gig workers. Nationally, the data was similar, with the cultural workforce having among the highest levels of unemployment across the country. Unlike the restaurant and hospitality industries that are coming back and can't hire quickly enough, unfortunately, a good portion of the nonprofit arts sector continues to be partially shuttered. USD is currently updating the data for us, so we'll have a more current snapshot in a few months. But it's all safe to say that we're looking at a multi-year recovery. The philanthropic response was uneven. At the time of the survey, only 8 organizations received emergency relief funds from local philanthropy. In response, the San Diego Challenge Fund was created as a partnership between the San Diego Foundation, the City of San Diego, and the San Diego Regional Arts and Culture Coalition. 2 additional foundations jumped in, and with some crowdfunding and direct support from individuals, we were able to direct approximately $650,000 to individual artists and small and medium-sized arts organizations. And I want to give a shout out to the Clare Rose Foundation for being one of those foundations that stepped up in the early days of the pandemic. This is in addition to the $1 million the city was able to allocate for direct acquisition of existing artworks by visual artists living and working in San Diego. But again, here's what we learned, or what was reaffirmed for us. Unlike other large US cities and regions, the arts and culture sector was not seen here as a critical industry or workforce. A bit of data, the nonprofit side of the creative economy in San Diego proper employs about 10,000 annually, plus many more as contractors. The scale is about $1 billion annually. The overall creative economy was recently measured for the first time and counts the parallel for-profit and nonprofit sides of arts and culture. This shows $11 billion in economic activity, employing more than 100,000 San Diegans. So we had to wonder, what isn't resonating? Why aren't the arts and artists resonating as key employers and critical components of a diverse economy here in San Diego? And if you're competitive for San Diego, what are the arts and culture sectors in other US cities doing differently to attract the scale of emergency relief that those cities saw, both inside the cities as well as nationally? It appeared that either the arts sector in San Diego isn't telling our story in a compelling manner, or perhaps we've been so successful at embracing the value of the arts as a tool for tourism and entertainment for our residents that perhaps we have not emphasized the cross-sector work of the arts that happen every day in our city. The mayor emphasized 2 areas, equity and collective impact. So back to what we learned about COVID, we need a collective impact strategy for the arts in San Diego to address our most critical needs in arts and infrastructure. I want to give you a quick example of an extraordinary initiative that's taking place in 7 cities across the country, Chicago being one of those. The Chicago Cultural Treasures Initiative is a 4-year initiative led by Chicago-based MacArthur, Joyce, Polk Brothers, Terra, and Walder Foundations, who have together committed $12 million to bolster the administrative and capital resources for the city's long-standing BIPOC cultural organizations that have been chronically under-resourced. An additional 5 million came from the Ford Foundation and 8 million recently from Mackenzie Scott. As I said, Chicago is one of 7 cities that the Ford invited into this cohort, but invited based on their track record of collective impact in philanthropy for the arts. These initiatives have come on the heels of collective impact strategies for the arts in a number of our peer cities, bringing millions to the arts at all levels of the community, from community-based and BIPOC-led to the very largest institution, recognizing the power as employees in our anchor institutions and the empower of community development among the smallest. I'm going to cut my comments short so I can turn this over to Matt to talk about the power of creative youth development in our neighborhoods. Excuse me. But I would like to end that with thanking Matt and Clare Rose Foundation for the great national work that Clare Rose is doing right now. Not just convening the creative youth development space here in San Diego, but across the country. So Matt, I'd like to turn it over to you to talk about some of the best practices that you're working on.
Thanks, Jonathan. Yeah, I want to focus a little bit on creative youth development, but overall just focus on like the importance of collective action and collective impact of working together. Because Clare Rose is a really, really small family foundation. Not many people have heard of us. They're starting to hear us a little bit now, but we're small, and because we're small and have limited resources, we've had to really stay focused and leverage both the financial and human capital that we do have to have an impact. And one of our main focuses is creative youth development, which is the intersection between the arts and youth development. We feel like it gives us the biggest bang for our buck because it's such a holistic approach, centering deep arts learning with youth development outcomes, providing positive adult mentorships, providing holistic services such as mental health support for young people, academic support for young people, leadership development and community engagement. So it's really like this multifaceted, deep engagement with young people centering on the arts and really helping them to reach their full potential. So we really want to go all in on that because it just hit on so many different interest areas for us. And our approach as a foundation, because we have limited resources, has been really by partnering and convening other funders and other agencies and cross-sector partners in our work. But we really have a 3-pronged strategy. First is like we do make financial investments. We're a trust-based philanthropic foundation. So we make direct multi-year general operating investments in small community-based arts organizations. And we also provide responsive grants for capacity building and organizational development. So we're really working closely with these organizations to identify what capacities need to be built, and then we make further financial investments in them. At the same time, we've launched a whole series of programs and services to curate capacity building programs and services for both individuals and organizations working in creative youth development. So we do personal, professional, and leadership development, an array of organizational development strategies, technical assistance. We've invested in the creation of shared tools and resources, such as shared evaluation tools, shared creative youth development databases, have brought together back office support to create efficiencies between these small organizations. And so there's a lot of programming that we do hand in hand with the organizations, and we co-design these programs. And third, kind of what Jonathan was alluding to, we lean heavily into advocacy and education to engage the larger community, both locally, regionally, and nationally, really in systems change and to build the capacity of the community to support small community-based arts organizations. So we invest a lot in data and research, and we then use that data and research to tell stories and communications and storytelling. And then we convene cross-sector partners, whether they're funders or universities or researchers, the creative youth development field, into multiple various spaces to bring people together to talk and learn from each other and see what support is really needed. All of our grant making and capacity building services are really focused locally, but we felt it was necessary for us to take a leadership role in the state level and the national level. So we've embedded ourselves in multiple areas, whether it's the National Partnership for Creative Youth Development, or Grant Makers for Education, or Grant Makers for Thriving Youth. And we've also launched our own convening initiative in partnership with our friends at Heinz Endowment in Pittsburgh, where we bring together the city agencies, state agencies, small and large family foundations, and community foundations around the country every month for a conversation around how can we better serve the field of creative youth development, how can we work together to strengthen these organizations. And the reason why we want to take that national position is so that we could lift up and amplify the great work that's happening here in San Diego, learn best practices from around the country and bring it back to San Diego, but also what Jonathon was alluding to before was bring in national funding. Because San Diego is limited with its arts and culture funding, especially around foundations, how can we get the Fords, the Mellons, the MacArthurs to bring money into San Diego? And it's beginning to happen. I think recently Mackenzie Scott invested $1 million in one of the creative youth development organizations. We've got some money from the Mellon Foundation supporting a new coalition of CYD organizations working in juvenile justice. And there's some other things on the horizon. So I think the reality of let's use the resources we have, right? Even as a small family foundation, we can have big impact by not just focusing on the funding, but by bringing people together and working collectively, and then bringing outside funding into the community. So that's kind of our approach and our philosophy, and how we kind of trying to move the needle. And even though there's a lot of national attention and starting to be some investments in these organizations, they still struggle day to day. These organizations are all like under $1 million. They're all primarily based and operating in low-income communities of color. There's still a lot of inequities in funding, especially in the arts and culture community. They're all fighting over breadcrumbs, leftover breadcrumbs sometimes. And I said earlier to Mayor Gloria, it's, a lot of money flows to the larger institutions, which is great. It's not an either or, it's a yes and. We've got the opportunity and the money, I believe, in San Diego, in philanthropy, to do both. And 5% of what it took to create the Rady Shell could have a huge impact on the smaller organization. So how do we do that? I think that's the $1 million question. How do we really tap into health dollars, justice dollars, education dollars, community development dollars, workforce development dollars to diversify the portfolio of funders in San Diego, funding creative youth development, arts and culture? But then how do we really work together? I think that Catalyst is one of those avenues that they convene people, they bring people together. Jonathon and I have discussed starting a arts and culture working group at Catalyst to bring these multitude of funders together on a regular basis to learn from each other and to work more intentionally together. So that's really the hope of this series and of the launch today and in the next 6 months, is to bring these local funding community together, have them kind of see themselves in arts and culture, and then work together collectively with the city as well to really drive a larger impact with the entire arts and culture ecosystem. Because I think we need to take a holistic approach, not just of institutions or single organizations, but how do they all work together? How do they support each other? Because the small organizations are working with the institutions. I mean, the artists in the small organizations are working for the large institutions. So it has to be a yes and. How do we kind of come together as a philanthropic community to ensure that that happens? So that's kind of my take as a small family foundation. But I think it's possible. I mean, all of this is possible. I mean, you look what's happening in other cities. I mean, I think San Diego is unique, but we can do a lot with what we have as well, right? There's enough wealth, private wealth and foundational wealth in San Diego to do just as much as the larger cities are doing in arts and culture. It's just, do we have the will to do it?
Matt, thank you. We have probably 6 minutes left. This would be a great opportunity for conversation. If anyone has any comments, feel free to drop them in the chat.
Or if you are currently funding arts and culture, what are the challenges that you're having? What are the interests, or why did you show up today for this presentation? Is there something you hope to learn or discuss or connect with other people? Just throwing it all out there with the last few minutes that we have.
Well, one of the things that we touched on earlier, actually the mayor touched on it and then you touched on it after that, Matt, was this excessive collective impact in other sectors and transferring that to the arts and culture sector. And you often reference the question around us positioning arts and culture as a tourism element as opposed to a tool for social justice and social good. That is quite a shift in narrative. How do we start doing that? And I actually would love to ask Megan, as the leader at Catalyst, how is that narrative shift happening in other sectors that you work with?
Yeah, I mean, this is a pervasive or a resounding conversation that's happening across the country, really. I think that, there's a term of art, right, intersectionality, but it's really just this idea that our lives are complex and you can't approach any single issue without acknowledging the environment in which you're doing that. I think that one of the best illustrations of that is trying to help a kid learn by reducing classroom sizes. But if that child hasn't eaten in the morning, then their learning opportunities are not going to get particularly better. And also address that. So for me, I was just so thrilled to be able to bring this group together with Jonathon and Matt and under their leadership to say, where can we all come together? When we look around our region, we have such incredible diversity, but if you really are in communities, you see arts and culture everywhere you look. It's expression. And when we think about issues of equity and inequity, when we think about people's lived experience through the pandemic and beyond, it's in dance and song and painful words and celebration that people are surviving or expressing their needs. And so if we weren't able to have that, we would lose so much of the ability to create a shared experience or just different ways of interpreting information. Now, some of us are visual learners, some of us are auditory learners, some of us are learn by reading. And I think when I walk into the airport, when I come home, I know I'm home because of the visual cues. Some of it's the palm trees and the skyline, and some of it is those really cool lights on the ceiling of the airport. And that type of experience can help ground our conversations. And so for me, I think when we look around, say, at the hunger conversation or the food security conversation, there was this incredible movement towards, farm to table and really eating local produce because of what some people saw as safety concerns, or for some people, they were driven to support local farmers. But through that, for example, I think Vicki might have left, but the Parker Foundation funded Coastal Roots Farms to work with one of our tribal governments to provide food to some reservation and some elder urban Indians. And that relationship has continued. So it's this new way of thinking, not, to the mayor's point, not in what have we always done or what are the ways that the systems are already set up and can we put more resources into those same shoots, but what are the new ways to do things? What's not working and how can we think of a different approach? And for me, bringing the arts and culture sort of revolution. Like, think about Woodstock. What do you think about? Think about the Black Panther Party. What do you think of? You think of the imagery and the words and the language. And so I think there's just so much power in the conversation that's happening here that will resonate across different sectors as well.
You know, one of the things, thank you, Megan, for that. One of the things that resonates with what you just said is one of the paradigm shifts we're really embracing at the city, and in particular at the Arts and Culture Commission, is it isn't us to decide how the community identifies arts, culture, and creativity. It's ground up. They need to identify, the community needs to identify arts, culture, and creativity. And we are working hard to reposition ourselves so that we're actually in a position to support and advance and not instruct, using some rather specific terminology. But that has been a wholesale mind shift for us to step back and recognize that we work for the city, we work for the residents of the city of San Diego. They are our bosses. And the work of the Commission for Arts and Culture is to ensure that every San Diego resident can experience arts, culture, and creativity on his or her own terms and as he or she or they need.
Yeah. I could give an example of that. That's really interesting, right? So there's an event called First Saturdays that's hosted by a group called Pillars of the Community in Southeast San Diego, and it's some vendors, people from the community selling their earrings, books, food, that sort of thing. And oftentimes there is somebody there who's teaching dance. Not like a formal class, but just, you know, put the radio on, or I guess cell phone with a speaker these days. I was thinking of like a boombox, but I doubt that's what it is. put the music on, and one of the women stands up there and teaches one or another form of dance that comes from Africa. And this is one of the ways that children are learning their heritage and developing a sense of community with the people there. The funding that goes to that First Saturdays, if any, is not arts funding, you know, but that is what's happening in that place. And that is creating this larger sense of community and identity and confidence and connectivity that's like so incredible.
If I could jump in there.
Yeah, Don.
What she's speaking of is one of the activities of the 8 blocks where we've been encouraging the African-American businesses and the arts organization, advocacy, health organizations to do just that. First Saturdays, the last Sunday, we're really trying to bring that community together as a safe haven for African-American families and families that support culture, all the way from 61st Street to 68th. So this is exciting because I've never heard anybody use the terms about youth, family, and community development through the arts. So it's exciting to see that it's been going on for so long. And thank you for pointing that out about First Saturdays.
Dahan, I'm glad you're here. Dahan is one of our commissioners for arts and culture. So I think we are at about time. Thank you all for joining us. I think I should turn it over to Matt to tee up the next session and close the conversation.
Yeah, just real quick. Thank you everybody for taking time out of your busy Mondays. I know everybody's just getting back into the week. So thank you for joining us. And thanks again to Catalyst for being our partner and hosting this series. We will be continuing the conversation next month, August 20th at 11. We'll be talking about the intersection of arts and culture with justice. And our guests will be Helena Huang from the Ford Foundation's Art for Justice Fund. She's one of the biggest national leaders in art and justice. And locally, we'll have representation from Chelsea Rohani from the San Diego Youth Arts and Justice Network, and Amanda Wallace from the San Diego County Office of Education and Juvenile Court and Community Schools. So that will, so August will be centered around the arts and justice, and then September is going to be focused on the arts and health. So those are the 2 ones that are coming up. So if you can mark your calendar, and you'll be getting reminders from Catalyst on those sessions. Real quick, if you could fill out the survey before you leave, it would be appreciated. Just 3 questions, just real quick. I'll do it right now. Well, all right.
That was some excellent modeling. Matt.
So,
Love it.
all right, I just did it. I just.
Thumbs up.
So yeah, thank you everybody for joining us. I hope we see you at future sessions. Thank you, Megan and Jonathan, and again, the mayor for joining us, and hope to see you soon.
Thanks,
Thank you
everybody.
guys for doing this. Thank you so much.
That was great. Thanks, Matt.